Well, this weekend in college football had a lot going on. From the winning team of a bowl game eating a Pop Tart to that Pop Tart sacrificing himself and putting himself in the toaster to seeing, instead of a Gatorade pour on a coach, we got a grass clippings dump, which was awesome to see. And we also saw possibly a coach running faster than any of his players just to escape a Gatorade dump. Now, we'll get into a lot of that later on today's episode of the Drury and Friends College Football Show. My name is Ben Drury, the host of the show. On today's episode, just a quick rundown. We're going to be breaking down, like I said just now, the Pop Tarts Bowl and the TaxSlayer Gator Bowl. I'm going to be giving my first gut reaction to both matchups. And then a little bit later on in the episode, I'm going to break down the latest installment of the BTN Top 25. If you're unaware of what the BTN Top 25 is, it's the By the Numbers ranking system, which is the sponsor of the Drury and Friends College Football Show. So without further ado, why waste any more time? And so this matchup between BYU and Georgia Tech was a great one. Now, watching this matchup, it had a little bit of everything. There was a lot going on. Just if you tuned in at any point, there was entertaining football being played. From BYU starting the game off, not very good in the offensive front, and Georgia Tech getting out to, I believe, an 11 to 14 point lead at one point in the matchup. BYU was able to come back, and they were able to win this matchup. 25-21 was the final score. Now, many times during this game on the broadcast, whatever it may be, BYU going into this game 11-2, with their two losses only coming to Texas Tech, which is impressive for BYU on that front, as a great top 12 team in the country, as you can see down there, the 12th ranked in the country. That's a really, really good thing for those BYU Cougars. Now, what I would say about BYU is this. So going into this matchup, BYU, they lose their star running back, LJ Martin. He's out for the season. I believe he was the Big 12 Player of the Year, but he's out of this game. He's not unable to play in this game. And so that really, really hurt BYU on that front, which is unfortunate for BYU because that truly, truly led to some of their demise early on in the game. However, they were able to bounce back from this, and they were able to not rely too heavily on that rushing attack and truly, truly get back to what they do well in, which is passing the ball. Now, there was many times where Bear Bachmeier, freshman quarterback, who a lot of people have been saying has gotten snubbed for more player of the year hype around him because of just how good he is. This isn't the Bear Bachmeier support show or fan club. However, he goes 27 of 38 for passing for 325 yards. He has one touchdown and one interception. That's great football. That's great football from Bear Bachmeier. He gave his team exactly what they needed. Now, BYU, they get two rushing touchdowns from two different players, Jovesa Damuni and Enoch Nawahine, number 21. And so both of those players get one rushing touchdown. So obviously showing that they miss LJ Martin, but not enough. They didn't let that get them down, and they were able to get back to the basics and play successful football at that point in the game. Now, here's the thing. For BYU, great offensive team. Georgia Tech, another good offensive team. Now, the thing BYU was able to do well in this game was limit Haynes King. And so Haynes King, senior quarterback for Georgia Tech, he was shut down, essentially. And so whenever you are Georgia Tech, where truly Georgia Tech's main offense has centered around Haynes King because he is a good quarterback. Whenever that happens and you're so one-dimensional and you're unable to do anything following that thing, that can just lead to chaos. And that's what happened for them. They go scoreless down the stretch, and it's just not what you want to see if you are Coach Brent Key for the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Now, some closing thoughts on this one is that Georgia Tech and BYU, both good teams. They're very, very good teams, and this was a pretty great matchup, like I said a little bit earlier on in the show, where tuning in at any point in this matchup, you are going to get what you wanted, and it was truly a fun game to see. Now, with that being said, some people think, and I think I said this in our show 2 days ago, where some people have differing opinions on whether or not BYU should have been in the college football playoff or, their seeding or whatever it may be. However, this game was a great matchup, and it shows that this is what a good bowl game should look like. That where even if you're not playing in the college football playoff, that doesn't mean your season's over, and you can continue to play meaningful games in that last game of the season, which was this matchup. So with that, moving on. In this game, the TaxSlayer Gator Bowl, this was unfortunate, to say the least. I'm a Missouri Tigers fan, and in breaking this down, I'm going to try my best to be as impartial as possible towards Mizzou, and to cover this game as best as possible. But this was just unfortunate, to put it simply. To be honest, this was just unfortunate circumstances for Mizzou as well. They have third-string quarterback in, Matt Zollers. This is his third start of the season. He's a freshman. And I believe down the stretch, in the closing 5 minutes of the game, he was only 5 passes. He had only thrown 5 passes, which I think this might be pretty common sense. That's not a good resume for success in college football. Now, Mizzou was able to stay in it, not inherently so because they only put up 7 points on the scoreboard. They were able to stay in the game because of their defense, and their defense truly played well. There was a drive where there was 1, 2, or 3 drives in this game from Virginia where just they were able to draw out possession by so much. I think Mizzou didn't get the ball in the second half until 4 minutes remaining in the third quarter, which is wild. That is what that is what dominance on that line of scrimmage looks like. And Virginia was able to do that. Now, but Mizzou was able to limit their losses. They only give up they only give up 2 scores. Leaving a team to just 13 points, if your offense puts up more points, then obviously that's going to end up in a win. But anytime you limit a team to 13 points, disregarding how many points you put up, that is a win for that defense. However, and once again, this is very, very common sense, Mizzou's offense just did not come to play. And whether or not you could blame many different things, whether that be because Kirby Moore, offensive coordinator, left to take a different job, and you have a new person calling plays, and there's a changed play strategy. You have a true freshman quarterback under center taking snaps who has not been very good passing the ball all season long in his 2 previous starts. Whatever it may be, this offense was just not good. They have Ahmad Hardy. They have Jamal Roberts back there running the ball. 159 yards on the ground is not a bad day in the office. However, 100 yards from Matt Zollers, that's not what you want to see. Then that statistic was wrong. He had 22 pass attempts. I don't know why I said he only had 5. That's on me. However, He had 22 pass attempts all game long. He completes 12 passes. So he wasn't put in too many. And in watching the game, he may have had those passes, 22 passes total. However, how many of those times were they productive passes where even if there was a completion where it was setting up the receiver for success? There wasn't many times where they put a receiver down the field and let Matt Zollers, who I believe whenever he's able to throw the ball well, he is a very, very good passing quarterback. And, whenever his accuracy is there, he can perform very, very well in the passing game. However, there were a few times where he just overthrew receivers. Donovan Olubade had multiple times where that happened, where Matt Zollers just threw the ball way over his head, which is just not what you want to see whatsoever. It would be as simple as just throwing that ball a little bit lower, maybe getting it out just a little bit quicker. It's as simple as that. However, Mizzou is not able to do that. In my previous show, I talked a little bit about how Mizzou was going to have to limit Chandler Morris in this game if they wanted to have success. And Mizzou was able to do that decently well. They limit Chandler Morris to just 198 yards, which is pretty good. He doesn't have any touchdowns. He doesn't have any touchdowns. However, Mizzou loses. They give up a touchdown in the rushing attack to Harrison Whaley. And so that's the only touchdown in this game. But on that front, Mizzou was able to limit Chandler Morris decently well. However, where Mizzou was led astray and where they did not perform that well on defense was in these third downs. So up until this point, I believe ESPN showed this graphic many, many times during the game. Up until this point, I believe Mizzou had on defense, they only allowed teams to convert on third down 32% of the time. However, in this game, Virginia, they went 13 and 23 on third down. So that translates to roughly 56% conversion rate on defense. And then on fourth down, Mizzou let them convert 50% of the time. So that's a drastic change from where Mizzou has been playing all year long defensively to in this TaxSlayer Gator Bowl. Now that leads to, like I said, extended drives where the defense is on the field for 10 to 12 minutes in one case, and that just gets a defense down. And it's pretty hard to, stand up, take a deep breath, and be like, okay, come on, we got to lock back in and get this defensive stop. And that's what happened, and that's where that touchdown came from Virginia. It wasn't necessarily that Virginia was playing these better schemes or they were all over Mizzou and Missouri couldn't do anything to stop it, but it was rather Mizzou's defense was tired and they could not catch a break. And so that's not to anyone's fault. Obviously, it's to the defense's fault. And there's not much you can say. Like, there's only so much conditioning you can do. There's only so much you can prepare a team to be on the field for that long. But when it comes down to it, you need to be able to get your people on defense stops. Let them make sure that whenever they are in these third downs, and many a time they were third and long, 3rd and 10 plus, where you just cannot give up. If it's 3rd and 10, you cannot give up the 11-yard pass, which the amount of times that happened was crazy in my eyes. Now, we have a question down in the chat. Shrek8, I do not know this username, but he asks, what did you think about that last Hail Mary throw? So in the closing minutes of this game, there was, albeit controversial call, I was actually at 54 Country doing line dancing watching the end of this game. And I see this is it's 3rd and 10 with under 20 seconds to go in the game. Mizzou is in good position to possibly score the ball. And, given Matt Zollers throws a good pass, they run good plays, and, who knows what? Who knows? It could get in the end zone. However, Matt Zollers drops back on this 3rd and 10, maybe even more than 3rd and 10, and he gets sacked big time. Or he throws the ball, it's incomplete, but he gets hit hard and he slams on the ground, and he's asking for a late hit. Everyone on the Mizzou sideline is asking for a late hit. And then out of nowhere, the referees, and I'm not 100% sure on what the ruling is according to the referees and the legit NCAA college football rules, but Matt Zollers has to get replaced. He has to go out of the game. There's 8 seconds left on the game clock. It's 4th and 10. The season is on the line. And here comes Brett Brown, who is the 4th string quarterback. Now, after an injury to Sam Horn early in the season and after Bo Pubula enters the transfer portal, Brett Brown, he was the 4th string quarterback beginning of the year, and now he's the backup, and he has to come into the game. Now, I'll say this. He threw a dime. So, Brett Brown, great throw. However, how any Hail Mary pass situation happens, it's fully contested. Multiple people were surrounding the receiver attempting to catch the ball, and so the Mizzou receiver just drops it. It was in his hands, it's bobbling, and he drops it in the back of the end zone, and Virginia wins the game 13-7. Now, that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate as it is a loss. It's unfortunate circumstances, especially considering that, should Matt Zollers have gone out in the game? Should he have left the game? And, because who knows what could have happened. If Matt Zollers is back in the pocket, he's throwing that pass. Because it could go one of two ways, obviously, just like with Brett Brown. Either Matt Zollers throws that same pass and that receiver drops it as well, or does he catch it in the end zone and score a touchdown to tie the game? And who knows if the Mizzou field goal kicker, who they've had multiple all season long, it was Oliver Robbins during this game. Who knows if Oliver Robbins would have made that extra point, and it could have been a tie game going into overtime. However, on the complete flip side, Matt Zollers could have just thrown a complete air ball and missed the guy by multiple feet, and then it would have been even worse. However, good win to Virginia. They end the season 11-3 for the first time in program history. Mizzou ends the season 8-5. We've got a second question. Who do you think is getting the start next season at quarterback for Mizzou? Well, I was just going to talk about Mizzou next season, so this actually fits perfectly. Who will start for Mizzou next season? I think it depends on if Mizzou gets anyone in the portal, because that'll be very important. Because we get Bo Pubula straight from the portal this year from Penn State, and he slots right in. He's the starting quarterback for the first few weeks, and it looked great until that Alabama game, which actually went pretty well in my eyes. Bo Pubula, he played very, very good football, and he was a good quarterback from the portal, experienced player. And so I think it'll depend on if Mizzou gets someone from the portal. Now, within that, there's a second layer to that. It depends on who they get from the portal. If it's a very experienced quarterback, like someone from Rocco Becht from Iowa State, for example, or I've seen some people talking about possibly Drew Mestemaker in that argument from North Texas. And so that could be very, very important. Now, here's the thing. Another key point is that we still have Matt Zollers. Matt Zollers is still coming back, who, depending on if Sam Horn gets healthy, I would say if I'm Drinkwitz, I would favor Sam Horn in getting that start next season. Just because if we're thinking high school wise, Sam Horn was the better quarterback than Matt Zollers, a higher recruit. Actually, fun fact, Sam Horn was Travis Hunter's, the Heisman winner, Travis Hunter's quarterback in high school. So I think it depends on, I'd say about three things. It depends on, okay, is Eli Drinkwitz going to hit the portal hard? Is he going to go out in the portal and really, really try and get a good quarterback, a good experienced quarterback to come in for Mizzou? And then the second point, how experienced is that quarterback from the portal? How does he fit in the Mizzou system? How does he fit in with Chip Lindsey, the new offensive quarterback for Mizzou, the new offensive coordinator, for Mizzou? So, and then the third thing would be, how is Matt Zollers looking? Does Matt Zollers really compete? Because I would love to see quarterback competition in the spring to the into the summer months, because that, I think, out of competition would come the best quarterback possible for Mizzou. So I think those are the factors that it depends on who will be playing quarterback in the quarterback position for Mizzou next season. With that being said, now for an ad from our sponsor, BTN Picks, the official college football pick'em game of the By the Numbers ranking system. You can see down there below, that's the link to go play the game, kickingforhome.squarespace.com/BTN-picks. And this game, it uses odds generated by the By the Numbers ranking system. So that's over-unders, spreads, and you're going to have the possibility to just pick. If you're not big into the betting scene, or if you're not big into the understanding of how those lines work, or if there's a risky line you don't feel like picking, just go ahead and pick the winner, just the same as picking the money line on that pick. And it's great. You can create parlays, whatever it may be. I have a weekly parlay that I try and do, Ben's Best Bets, which it is with Heart and Hearts that I report. It has not hit all season, and I believe there are about 5 or 6 of those parlays, so that's unfortunate. But the key thing, to wrap it up, BTN Picks, join an account, create an account, create a group with some of your friends. I have a group with a bunch of my friends. My AP World History teacher from last year is in that group. Shout out to Mr. Hankey. We compete every single week, bragging rights, whatever it may be. You set the stakes. You make your picks, win those games. No money is involved, only points, and show how much ball you truly know with BTN Picks. Play at that link below, kickingforhome.squarespace.com/BTN-picks. Now, without further ado, we move into our next segment. We're going to be breaking down the latest installment of the By the Numbers Top 25. Now, I couldn't get the graphic done in time for this episode, so I'm going to be reading these through. However, you can now go and look at these rankings at the website, kickingforhome.squarespace.com/this-weeks-picks, this week's-rankings, excuse me. And so if you want to follow along, if you want to look score by score, because these overall scores are calculated by a sum of each specific category. If you want to see how the team has progressed all season, you can look at their chart, how, it could be a roller coaster season. It could be an exponential growth, or they could be plateauing just at the right point, or just been even growth all season long. You can do that at that link that I mentioned below. It'll be in the description down below as well. Now, so this is coming after all games Saturday, so yesterday. So all of the games have been entered into the ranking system, and we've seen a good amount of change. And I want to preface everything I say with this. So as you can see above, this is computer generated, it's completely objective, and they are unbiased rankings. That's the BTN's claim to fame. That is what it strives to do. That is what its main purpose is as a ranking system. And so these are not my personal rankings. This is not how I believe are the best top 25 teams in the country. I will talk about the best teams in the country in my own personal analysis of games, matchups, and previews of upcoming games, whatever it may be. So, quick disclaimer with that. This also is different than some other traditional rating systems, power ratings, whatever you don't want to call them. It's different, and I call it a ranking system because instead of rating teams and grading them based on certain criteria and then ranking them based on how they do in that criteria, not necessarily impacting how they look against the other teams around them, the BTN differs in that way, where a team's performance in the rankings is directly tied to the performance of other teams, just like how we look at teams' performances, how the College Football Playoff Committee, if you want to use them as an example, just how they would look at teams in a season in doing their rankings. For example, the BTN retroactively grades games. So earlier in the season, Florida State was a top team after that win against Alabama. And Alabama wasn't penalized as much for that loss to Florida State because Florida State was that much better. However, with hindsight, we can look at how Florida State's season finished. So Alabama is punished more for that loss than they were earlier in the season. So that's just something that the BTN does. And what that helps to do, it limits this kind of bias, if you want to call it that, where you look at a team's name and you see that they beat that team earlier in the season, and where then you just automatically give that team more credit because of the name or maybe their preseason ranking. An example I think of is Oregon against Penn State. Some people gave Oregon a bunch of credit for that win, and the BTN gives them credit because it was a road win, but not much more than that. So, enough being said with that. At 25 comes the Virginia Cavaliers. We just talked about them a little bit earlier. They rise 6 spots after their big win. They not by a big margin, but just a big win against Missouri in the TaxSlayer Gator Bowl. And they're 11-3, and they've had a pretty solid season. They played in the ACC championship game. So the BTN, if a team plays more games than everyone else in the field, that can often give them an upper hand. So in Virginia's case, that could be the situation. However, we'll see as the next coming weeks go on. We'll see how that truly plays out. But Virginia sits at 25 at this point. Now, at 24 is a surprise to some, and heck, it's a surprise to me as well. It's Ohio. So Ohio out of the MAC, and you can say whatever you may want about the BTN. Oh, it's wrong. Like, why is Ohio at 24? I agree. I don't think they should be there either. However, this is the last I'll say about it. But computer-generated, objective, unbiased. It's up there for a reason, so you can remember. And so Ohio, 9-4, they don't have a good strength of schedule whatsoever. For some clarity, there's base strength of schedule. You can't have a negative strength of schedule score. Their base strength of schedule or their strength of schedule score is just 11. And the base is 1. So that's not very good, obviously, just looking at it. But they have some good other metrics. Their performance score is pretty good at 100. They haven't lost that many games. They have a positive home away score, which just shows, okay, have you gotten beat at home, and do you go on the road and play well? So they have a positive score in that category. So that can kind of show why they're there at that point in the rankings. Now, at 23 from the Big Ten is Michigan. So they're 9-3. They have a score of 132.6, which is it's obviously mid-pack because they're at 23, or upper pack, but not tip-top tier. And so Michigan is here. They have a 53 strength of schedule score, which on a scale of, I believe, the max strength of schedule one could get is the highest strength of schedule score is 113.36, which I believe comes from Purdue. So a strength of schedule score of 53 is pretty good for Michigan considering who they've played. Now, some things that lower them to this point, they have a minus 70 score in that home away score, which I think comes in large part from that massive blowout loss in the game against Ohio State, which, yes, it was against a great opponent in Ohio State. However, it was a blowout loss. So any loss by that margin should be scaled up decently in considering that. Now, next is at 22 is North Texas. So they rise 3 spots from the American. They finished 12-2. Great season from North Texas. Some people early on, they've been ranked a good amount in the AP and the college football playoff rankings around this spot. So the BTN gets it quite spot on in that area. They play in an extra game in that American championship game against Tulane. And so just looking at their scores, North Texas could be higher, but once again, they have a negative 88.9 score in that home away score section. And that comes from, once again, a massive blowout loss they had to a top tier opponent. I'll give you that. A massive blowout loss they have at home. So that's just not what you want to see for North Texas, and they will end the season at 22. They could rise depending on how the teams they played this season play to through the duration of the rest of the season. Now, at 21 falls one spot is Western Michigan, another team out of the MAC, and this is surprising, and it's surprising to me as well. And before I continue, I talked a little bit about it, and I can't remember if this picked up. We were having some technical difficulties, so this might not have picked up, and you might not be able to go back and watch me talking about this. But something that happens with the BTN, and I don't have a proper term for this, is that if you have a team, so Western Michigan fills this slot, Old Dominion fills this slot, UNLV most certainly fills this spot, where you could have a team where, so Western Michigan, for example, they and Old Dominion, they have strength of schedule scores right at 20. So here's the bar, strength of schedule wise. Both of these teams, the Old Dominion and Western Michigan, are 10-3, and they've won by somewhat dominant margins all season long. So that indicates a pretty high performance score or home/away score, whatever it may be. So that's where those scores lay. And strength of schedule is in this hand, and those other scores are here. Now, whenever these two things are evened out, as the BTN does, whenever it's evened out, that bar can only be so high because that strength of schedule score is so low. And that bar for these teams looks to be within the top 15. Or maybe in the top 12 range, like right there. They can't get much higher than that. And we'll get into a little bit later as I get into the rest of the top 25. But they can't go much higher than that in the top 25. So, knowing that, Western Michigan drops one spot to 21. Old Dominion drops a spot to 20. So, they're 2 points away in the final score category. At 19 is Arizona, who's had a pretty good season down the stretch. They finish... Their record up until this point is 9-3. I'm just looking at it. Solid performance score, solid strength of schedule score, and they finish here 19, solid ranking. At 18 is UNLV from the Mountain West. This is coming off of a loss to Ohio. They, surprisingly, to my surprise, they don't go anywhere in the rankings. And so this is another example of this. UNLV has a strength of schedule score of 1. And if you reference what I said earlier, that's as low as it can go. It cannot go that low. It can't go lower than that. No negative strength of schedule scores. So UNLV is carried by that performance score, which is 99.31. So another thing with the weights or whatever, I'm not going to give out the certain thing, but performance score is weighted more than strength of schedule, which is how it should be. So UNLV, it makes sense while they're able to be somewhat carried by their performance score. At 17 is Oklahoma, so they stay pretty even. They haven't played a game, so they dropped after losing to Alabama, but they stay even at this point. But at 16 is Alabama, who does fall. They do fall after they didn't play, I'll give you that, but they do fall to 16, 11-3. They have a final score, of 162, which is pretty solid, as it's middle of the pack within the top 25, as they do fall at 16. Like I said, they're 11-3. What really gets them is that home/away score, which this needs a little bit of explaining. So if you look at their schedule, they don't have that many home losses. I think their only home loss possibly comes to Oklahoma, who they beat at Oklahoma. But something that is categorized as a home loss is the SEC championship game. And why is that? It's not weighted as much as a true home game because it was played in a neutral field, as we all know. But the thing that happens with Alabama is that they were the top seed in that game. If you know anything, I mean, all sports work this way. If the top seeded team is the home team. And in the SEC, Alabama was the number 1 seed. So, in my eyes, within the SEC, they should not have lost that game by as much as they did. But they did. And I'm just realizing there's a horrible typo in the bottom third. The latest top 25 from the numbers top 25. Yeah, that's bad. Sorry. It's supposed to say the latest top 25 from by the numbers. Sorry about that, but continuing on, sometimes that happens. Alabama, so they get penalized for that 21-point loss against Georgia. And so that gets them to that spot. At 15 is Vanderbilt, who rises a spot. USC rises a spot as well. I'm going to hurry through because I realize I'm getting up there in time. USC rises a spot. And at 13 is James Madison, who, this can be another one. This is a surprise to some. And it's a surprise to me. And, that's considering that, they got blown out by Oregon. They lost by, they got blown out, but they only lost by 17 points because garbage time scores, which I talked about in the first episode, which you can watch at the channel at the link down below. But considering that James Madison still stays here, they didn't fall because they didn't play. They did, I believe they fell a few spots coming after that loss to Oregon. And once again, this is considering talent metrics as well. This is considering many, many factors, and James Madison gets to this point. Now, another thing I will say is that it can be tough for the BTN to get, and this is something we will be working on in the offseason. It can be tough for the BTN to get rankings completely right for teams that do not play and it's not a matter of the most strong opponents, because James Madison's strength of schedule score is better than Vanderbilt, for example, or just to look at it, it's better than Virginia, it's better than Hawaii, whatever it may be, and those are comparable teams to James Madison. So, got a little bit off track. We'll be working on, and the BTN doesn't necessarily get rankings right all the time when they're not evenly tested as well as other teams. So, and it's not being tested based on just strength-wise, but it's being tested on, a lot of people say, well, just group of 5 teams don't play the same kind of football. They don't play the same sport as teams in the SEC. I agree with that. So it can be hard for James Madison or Old Dominion or Tulane to get ranked correctly when they don't play in those same sport games, if you want to put it that way. So that is something we will be working on, but up until this point, James Madison falls at 13. Texas takes the 12th spot. They fall 1, and I like Texas here. I think they weren't, I'm not going to say they were a snub from the college football playoff, but I think if Group of 5 didn't get in and Notre Dame did in, I think they had a shoe-in to possibly take that 12 spot. Maybe they're not, the rankings don't show this, but probably a little bit more than BYU. So Texas falls a spot to 12 here. At 11, before I'm going to get a drink of water, at 11 falls Tulane, who they're in the same boat as James Madison. They have one more game against a top-tier opponent. They've played Ole Miss twice, and so they've been a little bit more tested, which shows why they are at this point. Texas A&M falls to 10. They fall 1 spot after not playing, which is fair as BYU rose a spot, so they just switch after BYU did win that game. So BYU is at 9, at 12-2. Texas A&M, like I said, falls to 10 at 11-2. So at 8 is Oregon. In Oregon, Texas Tech and Miami, 6, 7, 8, or 8, 7, 6 respectively, however you want to think about that. They don't move after this bye week, which I think is fair. And something I'm seeing from looking at this is that Texas Tech and Oregon, 7 and 8, right next to each other. Their score is only 7 points away, which we're going to get into breaking down it, previewing the quarterfinal matchups that are to come. But just from face value, that is a good sign that quarterfinal game is going to be a close one and hopefully very, very entertaining. So whatever that may be. Now, the thing with Texas Tech is this. They have a first round bye up until this point, and some are saying, they are the weakest team to receive a bye, which I can agree with. And I think they should be in the top 4. They deserve to be in there. I don't think anyone should be in there over them. Now, the BTN doesn't necessarily agree, and this is a similar case where it's not about them playing those teams who play the same sport, but it is about they just haven't played good opponents in that category, strong opponents. That's shown by they have a strength of schedule score of only 10, which, when comparing it to the other top teams in the top 10, is the worst score by 30-plus points in some cases. So it makes sense why Texas Tech would fall here. So, that's a way that the BTN gets this wrong. Now, here's the thing. If Texas Tech wins that matchup against Oregon, they will rise. And something that the BTN does that no one else, that traditional rankings don't do, is that it ranks through the playoffs. And why is that? It's just to kind of show it's self-correcting. The BTN does self-correct itself. And so that could very well happen. At 6 is Miami, who they stay still, but they rose a few spots after beating Texas A&M. Ole Miss takes the 5th spot, who drops a spot to 5. And Ole Miss, my mom went to Ole Miss, so I'm like partially an Ole Miss fan, especially considering that Mizzou had a bummer season. I've been but I've been able to, maybe cheer on the Rebels a little bit more than I would in years past. And so I've said pretty much all season long that Ole Miss is a legit title contender. And we'll see what happens against Georgia. We'll, once again, to just say it once, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but we will talk more and more about those upcoming matchups in the days to come. But I think that matchup with Georgia will be a very, very close one. And, Ole Miss, they do have a low strength of schedule score. Once again, it's the second worst within the top 10 at 22. And that is all right. However, their big game bonus is 72, which is just how they perform in ranked games. It's a simple math equation. Ranked wins minus upset losses, the scores of each, and whatever that result is your big game bonus score. And Ole Miss has one of the top big game bonus scores in the country, which is big, big props to them, which gets them to this point. Now, call it controversial, whatever you want to say. Notre Dame takes the 4th spot, and they rise one spot to get to this point. And, once again, say what you want to say about this, and, you can say all you want about how Notre Dame hasn't played anyone, their talent, or, they just haven't. Why should they get to this point, the head-to-head, whatever it may be? And I say, come on. Because I'm looking at it right now, their strength of schedule score is just a half point off from Georgia, who's ranked 3rd in the country. And while one plays in the SEC and one doesn't have a conference, that being Notre Dame. So it's not a strength of schedule. It's not a strength of schedule argument in my eyes. And the BTN, it ranks teams based on performance. So it can kind of eliminate the name of the opponent that team plays and adjusts that performance to the skill of the opponent, giving a better performance metric than, just the eye test would be, because too many people use the eye test. And so Notre Dame falls at 4, and I truly believe they're the 4th best team in the country. I think if they were in that 12-team field, they could very well get back to the national championship game just like they did last season. Now, as we start the top 3, Georgia takes the 3rd spot, Ohio State takes the 2nd spot, and Indiana takes the 1 spot. And I don't think anyone disagrees with me here, or disagrees with the BTN here. This is what the College Football Playoff Committee got. This is their top 3. And there's not really too much to be said about it. These 3 teams haven't changed that much. They haven't moved. They've all been in the top 5 for the vast majority of the season, considering the first 3 weeks when the BTN is taking some time to kind of get more and more accurate. And so that's the top 3. That's the top 25, as we get to the 50-minute mark of this episode. And so before I close, this has this top 25 of the BTN, these two games we broke down with the Gator Bowl and the Pop Tarts Bowl have been all great games, and it's just about to get even better. So those quarterfinals are going to be coming up on Monday or Tuesday, tomorrow or Tuesday. I will be doing a breakdown show of the 4 quarterfinal matchups, focusing on each and every one. The BTN is going to give its opinions on it, what the BTN thinks the spreads will be. Does it agree with the traditional FanDuel, ESPN, whatever it may be? All of those things. I'm going to be giving some, keys to success for all teams in those fields. Whatever it may be, the BTN, the Drury and Friends College Football Show, will have it for you. Now, if you've made it to this point, thanks so much for tuning in our 3rd ever episode. I love doing this. I love talking about college football. And so I plan and hope to continue to do this moving forward with the Drury and Friends College Football Show. With that being considered, thanks so much for tuning in here tonight. Have a nice night. For me, Ben Drury, you can follow me down below on Instagram, whatever it may be. But have a great rest of your night and have a good week. Good night.